Hello everyone. While we wait for the conference to start at 3:30, we thought we will share the promotional video which we made for the conference, which kind of summarizes our viewpoint and the idea behind organizing this conference. I request my colleague Sid to share this video, which we already screened over social media, but sharing here just in case you missed it. Sid, the video, please.
India's rapid economic development has taken a massive toll on the environment, and it will continue to do so if we don't act now. So, should we act on this pressing issue? Of course, yes. It's kind of a future at stake here.
लेकिन क्या है ना पृथ्वी जी, it costs too much money to save the environment. So it's not in the best economic interest of the country. Besides, we have other problems such as poverty, malnutrition, unemployment. That's what we need to focus on. And we need to increase our GDP growth rate. Environment तो अपने benefit के लिए तो use करना है.
Ajit Chaturji, those things won't matter in the future. Due to climate change, our own well-being and existence is at stake here. चलो अपने future की बात करते हैं. India is the 5th most vulnerable country to climate change. Do you know what this means? This means more extreme storms, floods, and droughts in India. Do you really want to leave such an hostile planet for your kids and grandkids?
हाँ सोचेंगे, लेकिन अभी नहीं. Right now, our economy is going through a COVID-19 slump, and we need to focus on our GDP growth.
But do you really think our economy is resilient to climate change damages? मतलब अभी देख लीजिए ना, साइक्लोन आम्फान और साइक्लोन निसर्ग ने कैसे हमारी वाट लगा दी थी.
So what's the big deal in that? These things happen every single year.
Okay, so listen to this. Due to global warming, Earth's temperature will go so high that you have to forget all your beach parties.
No way! That can't happen.
Okay. अभी भी वक्त है. We still need to develop more and build more. All that I'm saying is, let's do it in a green and sustainable way so that it does not hamper the environment.
But this economic model has brought development, elevated millions out of poverty, and brought a prosperous and luxurious life to many people. So why should we change such a model? Tell me.
Yes, I agree with you. But don't you think that this model is a bit outdated? I mean, it was good for the last century, but we kind of have a bigger threat this century of climate change. So it's imperative that we must change now.
Prithvi ji, but this model has brought us so much wealth. Why should we give up our money?
But we are giving up money to climate change and pollution right now. Even the World Bank estimates that the total cost of environmental degradation in India amounts to 80 billion US dollars per year. So it's just not done. But what if I tell you there was a better way to make money?
Are you serious? I'm listening.
We need to transform our current economic model to a green economic model. With this model, our economy can grow without hampering the environment. Mr. Chatur, why do we really create wealth? It's for our own prosperity, isn't it? With this model, we'll have better resource and energy use. This means better jobs, better livelihood, and better quality of life for all. It's like hitting two birds in one stone.
You're not serious, are you? That's not really possible. Wait. Or is it?
Yes, it is. Register now and find out at India's first conference on climate economics,
Where notable scientists, industry experts, and economists will come together to discuss one agenda:
building
synergy between environment and economics.
We'll start in a minute. That was a little clip made by my own young colleagues.
That's great.
Yes.
I thank you again for joining today for this climate economic conference organized by Energy, Environment and Climate Change Group of Pune International Center. And I request our project leader and the convener of this conference, Professor Amitav Malik, to share a few words about yesterday's session and set the agenda for today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. Uh, let me let me first say a word of welcome to our today's speakers, invited speakers. I see that all of them are already logged in. So, for the third session today on changing energy dynamics for India, uh, it's a very important session in the sense everybody understands that things need to change, but how it will change and how fast it will change are the kind of questions that do not have clear answers. Who will change is another question that is like everybody thinks that somebody else will change. So I hope this session today will bring out the imperative for the energy transition, the strategy for the energy transition, the economics of the energy transition, and ultimately, of course, the energy transition which will make us energy independent with the help of technology. So we have with us Mr. Rahul Panandikar as the lead speaker. Uh, will give us a keynote on the subject. Then we will have Ajit Kapadia from CFSR, who has done a lot of research in data. He'll probably be able to talk to us about a strategy for an efficient and fast transfer. Energy economics is the main focus of Dr. Saon, and we look forward to that. Finally, of course, Dr. Nitant uh, will talk about the energy independence, how we can go 24/7 with RE and be totally independent. So, with these few words, I would like to once again welcome the speakers and the attendants. I see there is number 90 participants and increasing. Wish us all a very substantial session today. And off to Aditi, over to you for starting the session and introducing the speakers.
Thank you, sir. We will begin the third session on the conference, which is dedicated to changing energy dynamics for India. Energy, which plays an important role today in fueling the world's economic growth, is also contributing to climate change and pollution, which are increasing the burden on economy itself. This session explores ways to transition rapidly from fossil fuel to a renewable energy powered economy. Our first speaker today will give the keynote talk on uh, sorry. Our first speaker today, Dr. Rahool Panandikar, is the Managing Director of Boston Consultancy Group and a core member of BCG's energy practice. He has worked extensively with governments and departments on regulation and policy development. He will talk on imperatives of energy transition to renewable energy, especially in terms of planning, scale, and rate. Over to you, Dr. Panandikar.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you for this very kind introduction. I will project from my computer.
Yes.
I hope that's visible.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Thank you so much. And I hope I'm audible.
Yes, very well.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to share some of our point of view regarding the whole issue of climate action and the imperative for energy transition to renewable energy. Being the sort of first speaker, I'll use that privilege in a way to make sure that I do the problem statement right and make sure that I put across the problem statement in a way that allows the other speakers to give us a lot of the solution pathways and the viability that's possible. And hence, what I will do a little bit of is talk talk to three parts. The first part, I just want to reinforce what video just said with a little bit more data. I think there's more than a wake-up call. I think it's at our doors. It's no more a myth. I also don't want to create an alarmist perspective, but the fact of the matter is that climate change is an undeniable fact going forward. The second thing is, before we look at the imperative for India and what we really need to do, it is so key to start understanding India's context in the broader global context. This is as much an India problem as it is a global problem. And post that, we can talk a little bit about what we need to do and hence what are the imperatives for India. And is renewables alone going to be the solution to India's problem going forward? First and foremost, since about 250 years, the Anthropocene era of our lifetimes of human race has started. And there's one thing that's absolutely undeniable, that human activity, and if I may put it that way, frenzied human activity has undeniably disrupted the georhythms of the world. And we are in an era in which atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration has far exceeded what was almost an equilibrium that was established for almost 11,000 years in the world. Now, scientists have pretty much concluded that the rise in the Earth's temperature is largely in proportion to the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And what that implies is one simple fact, that we actually have a carbon budget. Everyone on this planet has a per capita carbon. And given in some way and form that we've already exceeded that carbon budget, it's absolutely imperative that we move into an era where carbon budgeting becomes a reality for us. And hence, this whole buzzword or paradigm that is coming up on net zero is not just a slogan, but it's actually a reality. I just want to put that in perspective. The average global citizen born today will have a personal carbon budget almost 1/8 to that of their grandparents. That is, in a way, the scale of the global problem we need to deal with. And I think the video eloquently captured it. We may not be able to have any more beach parties. But the fact of the matter is that we are far away from the Paris ambition. We are still very far away from the Paris goal. And the world is headed in some way or form to a warming, if business as usual continues, of almost close to 4+ degrees. And hence our commitment that we've made to the world, to the planet, is very far away from reality. And it's important to recognize that the impacts are not just going to be about the environment and more droughts and more floods. There is going to be tangible impacts on the GDP. And hence, there's a tangible impact just not on the environment, but on the economy as well. A plus 1.5 degree Paris ambition, our estimates show, will have a drop of almost 8% in GDP per capita, a 2-degree goal of almost 13%, and a 4-degree goal, or a 4-degree current trajectory of almost 30%. And hence, the imperative is not just about the environment and the future of the planet, also it's the future of the economy. But I guess if there's no planet, we won't have to worry about the economy. And the world is beginning to recognize this. At the World Economic Forum of 2020, this is just pre-COVID, while the spread of infectious disease was recognized as a huge potential risk for the world in terms of the impact it would create and the likelihood it might happen, there is a huge recognition that all the crises around climate, natural disasters, and water are likely the most important disruptors that the world needs to be focusing on. But there are multiple tensions at play that we have that have no easy solution pathway. And I want to state them up front. The first is the tragedy of the horizon, which is simply put that the catastrophic impacts of climate change will likely not have to be borne by our generation, but our future generations. And hence the question of, is this just to our future generations? The second is the tragedy of the commons. When individuals, individual nations, individual sectors act in their self-interest, not looking at the broader good. And the third, an equally important one, is the flattening of values, where we are pitting profit and the planet against each other. And hence, when you put these three things together, just like you put in energy, economy, and environment, there are no easy solution pathways. It's very clear, the imperatives there, but there are no easy solution pathways when we look forward. Let's take a little bit of time to understand India's context. And India plays a dual role, which is very interesting. All estimates show that India is likely to become the highest emitter globally unless we dramatically change trajectory going forward. The EU, hopefully post 21st of January, USA and China have at least committed aggressively to mitigate climate effects and climate impacts. We haven't done any of that as yet. And hence, if we continue around this path, we're likely to become the highest emitter globally going forward by 2050 or 2060. And in the video earlier, it was pointed out that we are the 5th most vulnerable nation. But if we take the economies that are greater than 1 trillion, we are the #1 most vulnerable nation. And hence, on one side, we clearly have the role where we are going to, if business as usual continues, we will be the highest emitter. But on the other extreme, we are looking at a situation where this puts at risk both economy and ecology and just the existence of many mega cities in India. And hence the role that India will play in the global emissions perspective is absolutely critical, whether it is in the 2-degree path or in the 1.5-degree path. If we take the example or the situation where we need to move to a 2-degree path, at the current rate and trajectory, India, which is currently only a 6% contributor of the 50 gigatons per annum of carbon dioxide equivalents, we are likely to become a 17% contributor going forward at around 2050. This is assuming that the commitments made by many of the other countries are going to fructify. If that doesn't happen, as one can imagine, we have a much bigger problem on our hand. And this includes the levers that one can apply on reduction of energy intensity, levers one can apply on industry, transport, agriculture, land use and land use change, and forestation, buildings, and all the other sources that are associated with net emissions and fugitive emissions going forward. But India's problem, has been stated, is a little bit more complex. It's the problem of both the roti, kapda, makan that we always did. It was also the bijli, but we really need to add the clean air as well. Our starting point is we are one of the lowest GDPs that has a high amount of emission. We are one of the lowest consumers per capita of energy. But at the same time, we have 6 of the 10 most polluted cities in the world. And hence the problem is even more intractable when one puts the perspective that there's no easy way out of all this, and it's all going to be a series of trade-offs and compromises going forward. But here's the important thing. All estimates by our own analysis and by the scenarios painted by the International Energy Agency point out to the fact that India will become, going forward, the largest emitting nation. We are on path to becoming the largest emitting nation. That's the bad news. The good news is that whether it's on efficiency, whether it's on renewable electricity, whether it's on fuel substitution, and all the other elements and levers that one can pull, much of these are proven technologies that require the will and the economic gumption to move forward. However, for the full 2-degree path, we're still a little bit away in terms of making the technological and economic viability come to bear. And so we have a problem on our hands, but proven technologies and line of sight to future technologies, I think, always provide us a positive outlook. But here's the reality. Since Paris, And remarkably, India is one of the few countries that is on track and on path to a 2 degrees centigrade compatible world. The other countries that seem to be ahead of us are small and in some ways minor, and whose contributions may not tip the scales as are necessary. None of the other countries, and as one can see, none of the relevant countries are in any way or form on path to be compatible to the commitments that we've made to Paris. And hence, this is a significant problem. But the fact that India has taken one step forward does allow us the luxury in some way and the opportunity in another way to become a potential climate leader. And it's driven by two initiatives, and they're related, and they should be related. The first one is renewables. Renewables are now the cheapest and fastest growing segment of India's energy mix. It is posited that there is no investment in conventional energy that is expected going forward. If anything, old coal plants will be decommissioned. More and more companies are putting CO2 pricing, not just in coal, but any of the fossil fuels that they're looking at, and hence impacting the viability of all projects in a positive way for renewables and in a negative way for fossil fuels. The Indian renewable energy sector, and I'm sure the speakers coming after me will speak a lot more about this, has innovated on baseload products. And hence, we have the opportunity to actually push this out even more. Further, we are pushing the incentives to localize green technology post-COVID-19. And hence, we are creating the conditions from the power sector perspective to take a lead in actually solving at least India's problem. On the transport side, there have been good signs. We were one of the countries that leapfrogged technologies to EU6. We have a strong biofuel policy. And there are enough impetuses that are being pushed in a way that allows us to move to a renewable-based transportation sector, a public transportation sector, and a transportation sector that is using all the new trends and tendencies in the markets. But I want to lay the problem out in the broader perspective, in the sense that these two elements, electricity and transport, only contribute to 43% of our emissions. And hence, investment in renewables and renewable energies is only solving part of the problem. Almost 1/3 of our problem lies in industry and in heavy transportation and shipping and rail. And then there's obviously the problem, which is about 20%, that is represented in agriculture. And hence, while we look forward and we look at renewables as an imperative, and I'm fully on that boat, we also need to recognize that it is going to be only one part of the solution going forward. And hence, what is it that we need to do? And I want to use the example of China, which has made a big bang announcement with carbon neutrality by 2060, keeping to a 1.5 degrees Celsius path. And what they have decided, based on specific levers, that they will reduce GHG gases by about 76% by 2050. They are on the back of renewables, they are on the back of nuclear, they are on the back of advanced energy technologies in the energy sector, they are on the back of efficiency drives, they are on the back of process optimization and device optimization. But at the end of the day, they have put together a very, very aggressive plan that allows them, in some ways realistically, to actually look at this problem and cap emissions that are compatible with the 1.5 degrees centigrade world. India's story is very different, and we need to be aware of that. India's story is because of a very different starting point. We will still need to grow the economy, but we will need to grow it in line with our Paris commitments. We can do this possibly through localization of technologies and build manufacturing capacities. And while the story with China is different, we will not have the luxury of taking a slow and a casual pace to this. It is a question of scaling up fast and to a scale that allows many of these technologies to be deployed viably. I want to take it to the crux of the matter. China's problem is one that's far more centralized. India's issue is a far more scattered problem. And hence, we have very limited levers for decarbonization going forward. Well, China's problem, 80% of the problem can be solved through just energy and industry. As we pointed out, a very small part of India's problem will be solved by just tackling energy and transport. We will need to look at a far larger range of levers if we have to take on this path of 1.5 degrees Celsius compatible decarbonization. And the answers are at all three levels. And I would posit that it is all within our grasp. Engineering will have to provide the solutions in the coming years. Renewable energy is already a solution that's viable and is being deployed at scale. But for the 1.5 degrees or the 2 degree solutions, we still have engineering needing to step in to provide us viable technologies for carbon capture or some of the other storage elements. It is as much a solution that's going to require political will, and it's as much a solution that's going to require a strong contribution from the financial sector, whether it is in line with our ESG goals or whether it is just, putting in more and more controls and reporting measures and returns measures that are compatible with a 1.5 degree or a 2 degree world. But here's the good news, and here's the imperative for India. When we look at and realize that India is going to be the largest emitter going forward in 2050, if we keep up with current policies, the abatement through energy and the energy sector is the largest component that we will need to invest in. And what that represents when we back calculate is a very significant change in the energy dynamics of India. And if you look at it, the generation mix looking towards 2050 in a base case scenario point to 52% wind and solar, 16% coming from nuclear, 14% coming from biomass, hydro, and other storages, and 19% coming from gas. And as one can realize that the imperative for India is extremely, extremely clear. If we break that down into installed power capacities, from the current presence of coal at almost 60%, we anticipate that to come down by 2040 to about 17 to 20%. And from a generation perspective, coal/thermal and gas should be contributing to only from the 72% currently to a base level of almost 50 to 60%. I'd like to make a case here for making gas as our base thermal power source versus coal continuing to be our base thermal power source. But the problems are the same, and the problems are known well, and everyone seems to know them. The first and the foremost, which is the eternal problem, which has been well studied, is the financial support to the discoms and the small banks. The poor financial health of our discoms is particularly detrimental to the deployment of renewable energies, as it increases the financial cost in terms of project financing for companies that need to get into solar when they look at the counterparty risk associated with discoms. Every once in a while, India does no favors to itself when we get into situations of contract renegotiations. And this on the back of policy flip-flops. The third, and we need continued investment in the poor T&D infrastructure. The high losses and the poor grid connectivity is continuing to hamper growth and is going to need further investments. And finally, a topic I'm sure Mr. Kapadia will talk about is the small-scale microgrid level projects that need financing and need financing to become viable. I want to leave with just one framework to emphasize the imperative of a movement to renewable energies. Given the trilemma that India faces in terms of energy, environment, and the economy, there are no easy solutions. India is a problem where there are many people who have to worry about the end of the month, while there's many of us thinking about the end of the world. And it's a very tenuous balance that needs to be put out. And hence, while we think about the environment on one axis, We really need to be thinking about energy and economy on the other axis. And the only solutions to us that seem to come out as immediate actions, if I were to call them almost no regret moves, are a transition into large-scale renewables, other fuels, and driving industrial efficiency and energy efficiency in a very fast and aggressive way to scale up. All the other decisions, whether it is a coal to gas, a large-scale EV adoption, a gas-based power, or on the other hand, our desire to continue to grow and in a way localize production of steel, refining, and cement are all difficult decisions and are going to need much more evaluation and support in terms of the value pools it creates. And hence, I leave with this call out that says, given where we are, given that at current policies we are likely to become the largest emitter, and given that the energy sector can abate almost 40% of that future emission, it is imperative for us to look at large-scale renewables, fuel transitions, and driving industrial efficiencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Panandikar, for that interest, for compressing in 20 minutes the international and national trends, and also the way you shared how to look at GHG emissions in a more wider perspective. We'll now go to our next speaker, Mr. Ajit Kapadia. Mr. Ajit Kapadia will give a talk on strategy for rapid shift to renewable energy in India. He has a wide experience in the energy field and is the Vice Chairman of Fuel Studies and Research CFSR. And he is also the Chairman of Quanta. I request him to deliver his talk for today. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Kapadia.
Thank you, Aditi. Rahul, excellent speaker, excellent speech. I don't know what to say after that, quite frankly. I think you've said it all. Excellent, Rahul, excellent. Now, what I'm going to do is really look at the strategy. Now, what kind of strategy can we adopt? I mean, basically, it remembers me the advertisement of Nike. Just do it. Now, it also takes me back to one of the problems that we faced in USA when I was working for a company, that in 20 months we had to put up a plant. And the project manager said, now I'm going to stack everything at the plant site and then wait for some people to come and put it up. So here, I don't know how to really tackle this problem, because it is a mighty problem. I really think it's a huge problem, and I don't know how one could really start looking at it. But I'm going to make an attempt, okay? And the facts and figures Rahul has put forward, I think it's impossible to really, follow that kind of a speech. Now, nor do I have the statistics, nor am I'm that well prepared. Let's put it that way. Okay. Now, first and foremost, the problem here very well put, that where we are and where we need to go. So Rahul has very well presented what is the scenario today and where we need to go. Now, the question is that we are today depending primarily on the fossil fuels to really give us electricity. Like 80%, 90% of renewable is all we have in the user part. I mean, we have more on the constructed part, but as far as the whatever we get our share, renewable share in the energy basket is only about 9%. And from that 9%, as Rahul also pointed out, we need to go to 80% renewable by 2050, if we are to remain on this 2-degree path. And I don't really see that we have any choice. Do we have any choice? I mean, can we really not go in the 2-degree path? Because, I mean, it's not India or anybody else. The entire problem is going to get mixed with all the countries, in the sense that the India's problem will be US's problem, the whole world's problem. It is not any individual country's problem, which means that we will have to follow the world example. I mean, if somebody says, okay, I'm not going to do it, you do it. But how can anybody think in terms of going below this 20%, 80%, 80% fossil, 80% renewable, and 20% other sources? The ARENA report of 2019 clearly points out that 20% we will have to get down to in order to really remain within the zone 5 degrees. Now, as Dr. One other issue that I think requires very serious attention is the issue that Dr. Malik's write-up shows, that we are using a 1.7% of India's of the world resources. Now, if you do that, how are we going to really create resources? So then the huge task of controlling 4.15 controlling 4.15 just to 420, 450 by 2050, I don't know, requires many key considerations, and they are very tough considerations. How tough, I really can't say, but they are very tough, and very tough situation we will have to tackle. First and foremost, sense of discipline in one and all. I mean, I don't know, so for whatever reason, our tendency appears to be rebellion. Whatever we are asked to do, we won't do. Whatever we need to do, we will say, no, it's somebody else's problem. I mean, the gap between the rich and the poor is a very significant example. I mean, those fellows who have nothing, they don't even need to worry about 1 degree rise, why 50 degree, why 30 degree rise. Whereas all the problem lies with quote unquote our haves. The haves have no discipline. Haves are not really worried about that, and haves continue to worry about the not worried about the future. I mean, I talked to the ladies club once, and I told them that, look, we need to start saving water, we need to start saving this, we need to, and they were all worried about how to go about buying 5 more saris. Now, where are we? I mean, where is the need for 5 more saris today when we don't need any more saris? I know that their cupboards have thousands of saris, not even hundreds of saris. So this is really the indiscipline among the haves, and that haves, I think, must, and I don't know how we can convince and how we can get to them, but they are the ones who will have to really sacrifice. The second most important part, I think, is the role of the government. I mean, I find that I am very happy that Rahool put up some of the statistics and some of these things, but I find that there is no development attitude. I still go and talk to companies like Gas Authority of India Limited now, which is one of the 7 major government companies. And I find that they will only do what they are told and what they need to do. Now, how long can we continue to do that? We will have to have that kind of discipline. We will have to chart. In fact, GAIL has a responsibility. Like Rahool said, natural gas will be the really a contributor, really a positive contributor towards going to 450, not negative contributor. In that sense, GAIL has a serious responsibility to tell government how to use natural gas. I mean, we can't just use it for 50% deliverability. We'll talk to that a little later. The government must take the lead. They must really provide the roadmap. They have to have a roadmap. Without roadmap, I don't know where we are going, because there is no seamless development. Today, we have 30%, almost 25% of solar in the solar generating capability, but we are only able to pass on 9% because there are no cords, there are no connectivity to the power sector. So now, how can we have this disconnectivity? How can we have this thing? Now they want to go another. Today we are about 40%, and they want to go to 110 now. So 40% of the 2,000 megawatts of solar energy. But how will we go to, 40%, about 250 megawatts of solar energy. But we are only at 100, we are only at 40 or 50. Can we get there? No, I don't understand how we can keep on saying that we may be we may be following Paris COP 15 agreement, and we may be following our commitment, but our commitment is, as Rahool, quite small compared to the commitments of others. That is why we are able to see if they are able to follow it, because our energy requirement is so little in that sense. Now, okay. So flexibility, because there are many things happening around the world. I don't really think we are contributing in any developmental efforts, but let's just carbon dioxide. There is a biochemistry, artificial biochemistry, in the sense that you're going to convert CO2, carbon dioxide, into chemicals. Now, with that happens, we have a good chance. The whole world has a good chance of, because I don't know carbon sequestration or carbon storage. I don't know how viable that's going to be eventually. So the CO2 conversion of CO2 to chemicals appears to be a very viable solution, and I'm very happy. I understand that IOC, Indian Oil Corporation, is working with Lanza of USA to really get with them in this issue. And another big issue is monitoring mechanism by the government. Today, I think there is none, because Petroleum Ministry makes their own plans. Petroleum Ministry does what they like. On one side, we say that we want to build 5 big refineries. On the other side, we say that there should be electrification of such high percentage by 2030. Now, what are we going to do? Are we going to work on both fronts and end up with huge redundant investments? One refinery's redundant investment runs in thousands of crores, thousands of crores of rupees. So how are we going to do that? There is no cohesive dialogue between the ministries. On one side we say this, on the other side we do this. So how can something like this go on? So monitoring mechanism, that every ministry falls in line, and not only every ministry, we will have to really, it's a huge problem, but every state will have to follow the line. Every state will have to follow the guidelines that are the roadmap that Government of India creates. So I think this is one of the very key considerations, that sense of discipline amongst one and all is a very important aspect. And if we don't have that, I don't know how and where we will be. Then the focus on efficiency. Rahool pointed out very well, but I would like to go even further on efficiency, because natural gas, if you use it in combined heating, cooling and power cycle for the industries, as well as for the rural areas, microgrids, then you get about 70 to 85% efficiency, which means you have cut down the carbon dioxide emission of coal, not by 10 or 15%, but by 80 to 90%. So carbon dioxide, the emission of carbon dioxide will be hugely impacted by the efficiency natural gas can bring in. Now, another aspect, every industry or everywhere you want to put in this at CHP, there will be some form or the other of space available. Now, why should that space be wasted? They should all be solar power, space. They must be all be covered with solar. Even the parking lots, even in the industrial rooftops, wherever you have, you must really make it a hybrid system for natural gas. And then we are talking about something like very close to renewable. You are only talking about 10% higher than the renewable carbon dioxide framework. So I think these are some of the efficiency part. Then the next part is circular economy. What do we mean by circular economy? Use, reduce, reform. There was a news we had seen that in the USA, they are asking for clothes, used clothes back, they're refurbishing and they're recycling. Now, if you do that, certainly your energy requirements will go down. Certainly your per capita energy will go down. And in the haves of the world today, how many clothes we have? I've got 20 shirts, and thanks to lockdown, I have not used more than 2. So I'm as much of a guilty as anybody else, but then every one of us have that. So basically, recycle, reuse, and reform. And then the way they recycle it in US apparently is they make it look like new ones. So reform, refurbish, and this thing. Okay. Then waste management. Huge problem. I mean, every municipal corporation, their problems are twofold. One, you have the big pileups of garbage. I don't know how many of you have been to Ahmedabad, but in Ahmedabad, you see, I don't know, mountains of garbage piled up. And every city has somewhere or the other, we have piled up, we have done that. So the garbage, the waste management, it has to be one of the most important issues. And the waste management is possible. I mean, we have shown, a Baroda-based company has shown that you can convert the waste into power. All this waste by pyrolysis, you can convert it to power. So there are ways of doing it, but we just don't want to do it. Uh, there is a UK company who is working on about 7 cities to do this waste disposal, plastic waste to power. So I think these are all possible. These are all known technologies. There is nothing new. There is nothing to be developed. Yet we are not using them. And to get one contract from one city, I understand from my friend that it takes for ages, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, those stages. So all of us, including individuals, the companies, the corporations, everybody, we all have to come on the same tune and the same line that by 2050 we want to get there, and we must get there in order to really create a situation for the survival of the next generations and the next generations after that. I, I mean, I'm very happy that the girls of the world, young girls of the world, have taken up a challenge to the UN and so on and so forth. So I think, okay, next is water management. Uh, You might argue, what is water got to do with energy?
So
Think about
sorry
it.
to interrupt, but 15 minutes are done. So please, if you could wind up in 1 or 2 minutes more.
1 or 2 minutes?
Uh, 2-3 minutes, because it's because next speakers also.
Sure. I'll do that. In fact, I should have told you earlier that you remind me.
Yes.
Because this is a subject one can go on and on. Okay, now the water management. You can argue that what's water got to do with energy? But think about it. You have a reservoir. From reservoir you pump to the cities. From the cities it comes to the tank at the bottom of your building. From tanks you pump it up. So how many places you use energy to bring water in uh, in your house? So these are the water management, and how much water we waste. I mean, really, it's a phenomenal amount of water we waste. Again, this is the 10% of the population and not the 90% population, but even 10% waste probably more water than many other countries. So these are the huge problems, I think, and I have really focused on the problems. I've focused on the key considerations and the support that we need to get from the government. And of course, I I don't have the statistics nor what the statistics Rahul presented, but all the same, I think statistics are to my mind the old story. Just do it, and just do it. I think that is really the slogan that we have to really follow. And yes, Dr. Rajiv Kumar's statement yesterday, he said in the opening remark that it's not just you, I, one city, one country, but the whole world will have to come together on this. And this is a problem that the whole world must come to an end, because if India produces X, Y, Z, then everybody must follow that, or the whole everybody must follow the target, because one following and not the other following will also not be a logical solution. So everybody must follow this problem, everybody must follow this lead, and everybody must just do it. So I think the final slogan is just do it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kapadia, for sharing so many diverse perspectives and the importance of vision as well as discipline and governance, which we often overlook, especially in conferences. So, thank you for bringing that action-oriented approach. Our next speak. Before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to announce again that if you have any questions, please share them in the chat box. We will consolidate them and convey them to the speakers at the end of the discussion. Uh, Our next speaker for today is Dr. Saon. Dr. Saon will talk on energy economics, green financing, jobs, and infrastructure. Dr. Ray is a senior fellow at the Indian Council for Research on International and Economic Relations, ICRIER, New Delhi. She is an economist who has published books and journals, articles on various issues like technological transfer, energy, and climate change. I hand it over to you, Dr. Ray. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. Can you see me?
Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
I'll start by sharing my screen.
Yes, please. It's visible.
Yes, you can. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it's clearly visible, both
Yes,
you and the screen.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you to Climate Collective Pune and Professor Mollik for inviting me for this talk. I will be focusing mainly on green financing, infrastructure, and jobs in the context of India. The previous speakers have in fact laid a very good background to what I will be talking about, and some of it is in fact repeated. So I will in a way jump to the financing part, skipping some of the slides at the beginning because it has already been covered. So essentially what we are dealing with is India's energy trilemma, and I'll talk about in a moment what this trilemma is about. I'll be talking about green finance, green jobs, and green infrastructure, and how we can achieve the low carbon pathway. The main question that I will be dealing with is that how can we finance this low carbon pathway? So in terms of India's report card, we have in terms of GDP, we were the fastest growing major economy in 2016 and 17. In terms of population, the second largest in the world, third largest emitter of GHGs, fifth in terms of the vulnerability in global climate risk index, and in coal consumption, the second. And all this brings together the trilemma that I spoke about. So India is yet to achieve provide electricity to nearly 304 million people and clean cooking fuel to nearly 500 million people who still depend on biomass. India is still heavily dependent on oil and gas and coal imports. And India's fossil fuel requirements, comprising nearly 90% of commercial primary energy supply, are increasingly being met by imports. And so cutting fossil fuel consumption will promote the twin goals of sustainability and security. And on the right, you can see how this trilemma comes together in the form of energy access, energy sustainability, and energy security. India's rising energy demand and contribution to emission is captured through this in the BP Energy Outlook 2019, which projects that there will be a 156% growth in primary energy consumption between 2017 and 2040. India's share of global primary energy demand will jump from 6% in 2019 to 11% by 2040. And industry is the strongest source of final energy demand growth, followed by transport. But you must remember that this was all in the pre-COVID era, so some of these have come down a bit. We may not grow as fast, and our energy demand also might not grow as fast. Nevertheless, we are really on a sticky wicket, as so to speak. While India's current per capita emissions are just about 1/4 of China's, its total fossil fuel CO2 emissions and per capita emissions grew about by 80% and 55% respectively between 2005 and 15, and are projected to grow by about 30% and 15% in 2025. And the carbon intensity of consumption had surpassed that of China as almost 1/3 higher than that of China by 2005. India's coal consumption has been increasing steadily and would continue to grow at a faster rate than Chinese coal consumption between 2020 and 2040, suggesting that we are in the risk of technology lock-ins. The World Energy Council has in fact presented the Energy Trilemma Index, and it ranks the countries according to the 3 parameters: energy security, energy equity, and energy sustainability. In terms of energy security, we score about 58 out of 100, and it is based on parameters such as import dependence, diversity of electricity generation, and energy storage. In terms of energy equity, we score about 48 out of 100. This is in terms of energy access, electricity prices, and petrol and diesel prices. And in terms of energy sustainability, we scored the lowest, which is 42 out of 100. And this is based on the parameters such as final energy intensity, low carbon electricity generation, and CO2 emissions. The energy security and independence, although India's energy security scores relatively highly, they have dropped since 2000. And to improve the oil security, the government has prioritized reducing oil imports, and the hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy has been initiated. The IEA recommends reinforcing oil emergency response measures with larger dedicated emergency stocks and improved procedures, including demand restraint action and proper analysis of risk using oil disruption scenarios. In terms of the sustainability, this has already been talked of, so I'll skip this, but you notice the graph on the right, it shows our high dependence on coal, and as Mr. Panandikar pointed out, that natural gas could be one solution or way out of this. Although the carbon intensity of India's power grid has declined by 29%, is expected to decline by 29% by 2040, it will remain 58% above the global average. This is all still based on the BP Energy Outlook 2019. And India's total net CO2 emissions will roughly double to 5 trillion gigatons by 2040, meaning that India's share of global emissions will increase from about 7% today to about 14% by 2040. So the challenges that India faces are threefold. One is the institutional and governance challenges. The energy domain is extremely complex. The coal, gas, and nuclear policy they are developed and implemented at the federal level. Although there is a single minister for this, for power, coal, and new and renewable energy, they continue to exist as separate entities. The electricity is in a concurrent list, and each state has its own power ministry with related departments and companies. The state electricity regulatory commissions have jurisdiction for the planning and power generation, for establishing tariff for public utilities, and dealing with investors for purchase agreements. But there are also a gamut of national agencies, companies, organizations, which create an extremely complex structure. There are at least 60 bodies, and they directly report at the ministerial level, such as companies, the Coal India Company, Oil and Natural Gas, Oil India, etc. and etc. The regulatory authorities are like the CERC or the PNGB. And then there are the financial institutions, that is the Oil Industry Development Board and the Power Finance Corporation. In terms of the pricing, the distorted pricing also there is a problem. And the reforms that are suggested is that the energy markets have to be performing better for efficient performance. And this means that it has to, the DISCOMs, their financial health has to be revitalized. So the problems that the power companies suffer from is poor pricing models, weak corporate governance, and ailing infrastructure. The IEA recommends that India's energy sector has to move to a market-based pricing for every energy commodity and establish the right price signals and rebalance the prices by removing the subsidies and the cross subsidies, and create a functioning energy market. The other problem that the power sector is beset is state dominance. The state plays a very important role in the entire value chain, and we need to build a joint vision and common reform roadmap. We have to create a cross-government framework for energy policy and greater coordination between institutions, market infrastructure, etc. And of course, knowledge sharing and training of human resources at the local level. So the key is technology, and technology will other people will talk about. I will jump straight to the finance part of it. Now, the faster growth of efficient appliances will reduce energy residential electricity demand and significant margins, considering the Indian market conditions, attracting the best available technologies and practices in Indian manufacturing, and particularly SMEs, will ensure the efficient use of energy resources. Now, some green finance statistics. Green finance flows in India consisted of about INR 1,1,000 crores for 2017 and 17-18, and 137,000 crores for FY18. During the years 2016 and 17 and 17 and 18, domestic private sector contributed the largest share, that is 63% and 51%, through debt and equity respectively, and commercial financial institutions accounted for 40% of these funds. Now, I'll just show a chart which shows you how the funds have been disbursed. Now, as you can see, the largest share was actually by the commercial banks, which is about 40%, followed by public sector undertakings, which was about 12%, and then 18% was by the government budgets. And most of the government budgets were in the form of grants and granting aids and budgetary allocation. And but nearly 80% of that actually went to the power sector in 2017 and 18. Now, the other problems that the finance market, the energy finance market suffers from is that there is lack of a bond market. Debt financing options for renewable energy and projects remain limited. Although green bonds have been issued for supporting renewable energy, there is not a large, because of the lack of a well-functioning bond market, this suffers. And the loans that have been given to cut clean energy have been driven mostly by short-term macroeconomic factors like excess capital liquidity. So what are some of the solutions that have been suggested? Alternative debt vehicles such as green asset-backed securities, green investment banks, and following the Basel IV suggestions, that the global banking regulatory framework, including assessment in the bank's assessment criteria, measuring the exposure of a bank's portfolio to climate change. But some of that is yet to happen. Some of the major milestones in terms of green financing. In 2010, the National Clean Energy Fund was established. Then in 2011, the National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency was launched. And that had also launched the Energy Efficiency Financing Platform. The Partial Risk Guarantee Fund for Energy Efficiency was launched in that year itself as part of this program. And the Venture Capital Fund for Energy Efficiency was also launched. Since then, we have had in 2016, the National Clean Energy and Environment Fund has been renamed to this, and a cess for coal was given in the budget of that year. Coming to green infrastructure, internationally, under the aegis of the G20, the Action Plan on Adaptation and Resilient Infrastructure, this outlines the work program for G20 in dealing with this. And this basically builds on the Sendai framework of disaster risk reduction, and it provides a comprehensive approach in adopting disaster risk reduction. Through accumulation and sharing of knowledge information, enhancing the enabling environment in developing capacities, and providing public finance, engaging in public-private sector partnerships, and mobilizing private finance. And of course, promoting the ecosystem-based approach. India, in fact, is part of the Sendai framework, and under the GPFDRR, it has actually funded by the World Bank, engaged in some of the green infrastructure. And in a moment, I will show you a table which gives you some of the GFDRR projects that have been undertaken in India for the last, in 2018 and 19. So you can see that there are some for resilient infrastructure, and there are some basically for also like climate resilient industries and capacity building and knowledge creation and exchange in financial resilience. Coming to green jobs, while we know that there is a great potential for green jobs, the top row in fact shows you that for as far as renewables is concerned, that is solar and wind, While the potential was about 330,000 jobs in 2016-17, the actual that was created was only about 99,000. As far as the potential that is there in 2021, all these figures are based on a report from Grameen India Foundation, which shows that green transport, there are about 68,000 jobs possible, renewables 9 lakh jobs, urban farming 5 lakh jobs, waste management 12 lakh jobs, water 82,000 jobs, and the total green energy jobs are about 31 lakh for the year 2021. But whether these will be actualized depends on how these projects, some of these projects are taken up by the several departments. As say, water and waste management are part of the municipalities of every city. Urban farming, of course, is largely a private initiative. And renewables, it could be either by the state or the central government, or by industry also. So to sum up all of this, in India's nationally determined contribution, we have pledged that we will in fact have a reduction of 33 to 35%. And we are on par to achieving some of that. By some estimates, we are actually going to achieve it much before some of this. But then it means also that we will actually aim to have 40% of electricity capacity generated by renewable by 2030. This will, of course, mean that not only changes in the power and the electricity sector, but as well as industry that was pointed out. But not only that, lifestyle. And for this, all of us can in fact contribute to that with energy efficiency in buildings, in commercial and residential sectors, and to move towards more energy efficient appliances. The requirement for finance and technology, of course, is there. And I have tried to highlight the kind of finance that is already there in the country. I'm sure the technology part will be talked about by other people as well. But finally, to conclude this, what I want to say is that we need actually innovative ways of thinking, and the contribution and participation of every citizen is absolutely necessary in order to achieve this low carbon pathway. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Saon, for sharing such a detailed account of energy markets and the Indian scenario, and also the barriers which we are already facing when considering energy transition. Our last talk of the session is 24/7 RE and storage technology for energy independence, which will be given by Dr. Nitant Mate. He is the founder and managing director of SeeGreen Solutions. He's an entrepreneur and an advisor involved in developing applications of solar energy and other renewable technologies for various national and international institutions. I request Dr. Mate to give his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Am I audible?
Yes,
okay.
sir.
I'll share the screen and
sure.
Let's see. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
And in the presentation mode as well?
Yes, sir. It's full screen.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. The topic I've been given today is 24/7 renewable energy with storage technology for energy independence. To set the context, human endeavor always has been to have better life, and we talk about development. But while talking about development, what is happening mostly is we are more or less talking about growth, and that has caused exploitation of natural resources, and that has created the problem. We are moving lesser towards well-being and more towards causing damage to the environment by excessive consumption. So essentially, what has happened is the world has woken up to that, and we have kind of taken to the idea of sustainable development, and every country has committed to that. Even with that, the environmental impact has been there, and there are diseases and deaths, and the impact is different on different genders, different ages. Based on ethnicity, there is different impact, and Of course, there is impact based on different income. There is excessive urbanization. These are the problems. The issue that everyone talked about is the haves. 10% of the rich emit about 45% of the world's emissions, whereas bottom 50% emit about 13% of CO2. And there is growing evidence of inequality everywhere. We are talking about global warming, loss of land, livelihood loss. We have problems with health, water, and so on and so forth. About 77% of the cultivable land of the world is being used for meat production. That is something we need to understand. All these things are coming together because I'm going to talk about energy, but energy is practically involved in all aspects of our lives. I talked about global things, but in India, it is no different. We are talking about pollution in Delhi. It's like smoking 10 cigarettes a day. About 12.5% of deaths in India in 2018 were because of air pollution or pollution indoor. There are millions displaced every year. We have got 65.5 million Indian lives living in urban slums. And there are issues. India emits pretty less as compared to the rest of the world, but we have to understand it's per capita. It's a very phony number because total as a country, we end up emitting quite a lot because we are almost 16% of world's population. In 2050, we are estimated to be about 1.7 billion, about 10% of world's, about 10 billion total population of the world, again coming to 16, 17%. We have gender inequality, we have problems. Women in India spend a large amount of time just collecting water. A number here will be staggering. If you see 150 million work days are spent just for collecting water. So we are having a big problem at our hand. There is loss of biodiversity, there is problem in food security, and all of it is coming together. If you look at the total concerns that we have globally, then or for human beings, it is food, water, and along with that comes a concern of health and waste. And all that comes together because we need energy for dealing with every one of these things. On the right hand side, if I look at this diagram, you see that there is land, water, minerals. These are all sources that we are consuming. And then there is biomass, there are the materials, we have food, we have livestock. And in the center of it, I've put energy because for any conversion or any use of any of these resources, may it be circular economy, may it be linear economy, whatever you want to call it, for every conversion, we are going to use energy. So energy is a key ingredient in human development. Now, once we understand that, we have to also understand that it is coming in different ways. I mean, the basic form of energy that we require is for heating. Now, that could be heating for domestic applications, especially the world which is above and below 30 degrees latitude, they require space heating. But below 30 degrees latitude, like in India, we are using heat in a reverse way. We require energy for cooling. So there is industrial heating requirement, commercial establishments, and so on and so forth. Major fuel requirement is there for transportation, may it be public, may it be commercial, or may it be large-scale transportations like railways or even ships and whatnot. We still require fuel. And the most convenient form of energy that we have found together is electricity. And that is used for lighting, for prime moving. Prime moving is for creating movement of any sort. And that would be again commercial, domestic, industrial, and so on and so forth. However, with energy consumption comes emission. And we have to understand that anything and everything that we do ends up consuming energy and also ends up emitting. So there are embedded emissions everywhere. So these are called upstream emissions. Suppose you are going to use some product or service, till the point the product or service comes to you, it has already emitted. Now, during the use that you are doing for the product and service, you again end up emitting. And then at the end of life of the product, when you want to say discard the product, again there are emissions involved. I don't think I need to clarify that in any details, but we have to understand that for anything we do, there is emission, and these are emissions over the entire life cycle of any product or service that we are trying to use. So today, when we talk about emissions, when we talk about renewable energy, when we talk about clean power or green energy, we also need to think whether the green energy that we are really talking about, is it clean or green? Solar photovoltaic, for example, or solar thermal, hydro, wind, bioenergy. Everyone thinks that, yes, this is going to be green, but in fact, there are embedded emissions in solar photovoltaic. By the time the solar photovoltaic plant is installed in your place, it has already emitted about 2 years worth of savings that you would do in carbon dioxide. So that means you start with negative. Now, on top of that, if you are talking about energy usage with battery storage, then you are adding batteries to that, and batteries have got finite life. And the finite life, that means every 5th year or 6th year, you end up changing batteries. So you are adding to your emissions, and then over the life cycle, it is continuing to emit. But fortunately for us, the life of such plants is about 25 years, and we are still better off using solar photovoltaic as a renewable energy source and as a clean or green source. It kind of pays for itself in about 2.5 to 3 years. And then every time you add a set of batteries, it probably takes another 6 months to pay for itself, but overall it comes positive. Similarly, if I were to look at bioenergy, a typical example would be a biogas kind of a scenario where I'm using biomass and composting that biomass in an anaerobic digester and trying to use the energy coming out of it. Again, we are very fortunate that these plants have got a life of 15 to 20 years. And interestingly enough, the embedded emissions of these plants are again somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 years worth of emissions, but we are definitely coming out positive in terms of reduction in emissions. So all said and done, I'm not going to take example of every clean energy source, but we see that these are really clean and it is worth deploying these sources. However, we have to understand that if we want to be better off in even use of these sources, then the core sectors such as steel, cement, aluminum, glass, and whatnot, these have to convert to use of clean and green energy at the earliest, because the embedded emissions are coming from the materials, those are going into manufacturing of these green solutions. So we need to understand that the sooner we convert our core sectors to work on green energy, the better off we will be, because they are adding to the emissions of each and every application or product or service that we are intending to do. So to do that, we have to make sure that we understand that it is crucial to have paradigm shifts. The first thing I talked about at the beginning was, we are talking about growth, we must be talking about development. Year on year increase in GDP, year on year increase in CAGR or whatever you want to call it, I think from the environmental point of view, it is absurd. I'm sure the economists sitting there are going to be not very happy with these terms, but I think growth is probably something that we cannot afford. It's the development that we should be talking about. Again, while we are talking about energy and clean energy, green energy, 24/7, we have to understand that we must be energy efficient. Not just energy efficient, but we should be actually resource efficient. We have to reduce demand. We cannot keep on increasing demand per capita and then say that, look, I mean, somehow this has to be met. We have to go from fossil fuels to renewable energy. I just showed you an example that renewable can be good. We have to think differently. We should be thinking about not just upfront cost, but we should be talking about life cycle carbon footprint. What emissions are we doing over its life cycle, and is it better off as compared to the conventional other options I have? Instead of waste treatment, we should be talking about waste reduction. Instead of consumption, we should be talking about conservation. I mean, these are all the paradigm shifts that are required before we even think about giving any solution for our energy problems. from linear economy, we should be going to circular economy. But again, we have to understand that any conversion is consumption of energy, and any energy consumption is emission. So we need to talk about how can we reduce the demand itself and then go from linear economy to circular economy. And when we are talking about grids, for large scale energy grids, I think the real paradigm shift that I would want all of us to think about here is a network of smart, small microgrids. So coming to microgrids for 24/7 energy independence. What are microgrids? These are small grids. These are localized. That is extremely important. So another characteristic is it can operate autonomously. So it kind of is talking to the grids or talking to the main grid, but it can operate in an islanded mode. It can be very resilient to disturbances because it can be standalone. It can cut itself out of the other grids, and it can respond faster and recover faster from any shutdowns or anything that happens outside the grid or even within the grid. Because it's a smaller grid, the response time can be very small. So it also provides flexibility, and since it is small, in most of the places, it will also be more efficient. And then is really a decentralized distributed energy grid that we can think about. So it is local, and it is based on local resources, and it serves the local consumer. And that is very important. And that also reduces the emissions, losses in transmission and distribution. So overall, there is increased efficiency of electricity delivery. And most importantly, since it is a decentralized grid, you can think about that to be very large percent renewable grid, and it is also be going to give you related products and services. We should not be talking about an energy microgrid per se, but it's a microgrid of sustainable alternatives. So, for example, here I have given what I'm talking about is a network of smart microgrids. That is the future of energy. What you see on the bottom, there are four squares. Let me try to see if I can point them for you. Yeah, so there is microgrid 1, microgrid 2, microgrid 3, microgrid 4. They are all connected together, but they can each operate independently. And that is the beauty of these microgrids. So they are very, very flexible. I'll go to a little more details of what kind of microgrids these could be, but we have to understand that they can maximize local and renewable energy. You can prioritize based on the economics and availability, because every place the microgrid is going to have different inputs. For example, in one place it could be a biogas based grid, in another place it could be a micro hydro grid, in third place it could be something else altogether, or just completely solar. But we have to understand that the whole idea is we have to minimize cost of energy, we have to reduce losses of load. That means a grid failing is something that needs to be reduced. It should be 24/7, 365 days. These are going to be very smart grids, including prepaid meters or time of the day tariffs, net metering. Every consumer can also be a producer. The microgrids can allow you to do that. So altogether, you minimize cost of storage. These will have to be hybrid, because renewable energy, any renewable energy source by itself, 100% of the times is going to be very difficult unless it is a biogas or biodiesel kind of a grid. Then you can build controls on that. We have choice of connecting and disconnecting loads. So demand side management is going to be very easy because these grids are small. And then these have to be hybrid. It can be hybrid of different renewable energy sources. So these are distributed resources, distributed generation. These can be backup. Every user is also producer. So you have something called prosumer. And most renewable energy solutions require hybrids. So these grids are going to be hybrid. The tariffs can be different. And most importantly, we have to think about these grids, which can be there at village levels in country like India, because the resource is distributed and the villages can really become the suppliers of energy for the entire country. So it's like empowering the villagers when we have small microgrids. So look at this grid. It can be a solar PV with biogas. When we talk about energy storage, we don't have to think about batteries all the time. The grid, if it is based on biogas, the energy can be stored in the form of gas itself. And you can start the genset on demand or whenever it is required. Interesting thing about using biogas is you also have waste heat, which can be converted to cooling, and you create additional service like a cold storage, which is another important aspect from the food sector and the cold chain sector of India. We have issues because we have about 40% loss of perishable food in India because it cannot be processed for lack of energy, or it cannot be stored at lower temperature for lack of energy. So if you have decentralized microgrids, these things are possible. So you minimize the cost of storage by changing the type of storage. You can have a biodiesel diesel microgrid. Biodiesel is definitely a green fuel, which is based on waste oil or non-edible oils. And then you can also have it hybrid with diesel because you may not have enough supply of biodiesel. Or it could be a gasifier fuel cell microgrid. A gasifier is basically something to do with burning, controlled burning of biomass in lack of oxygen, where you convert that to a fuel which is primarily carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and then you can convert that hydrogen to energy by way of fuel cells and carbon monoxide to energy by way of something like an engine. Or you can have a conventional, I'm calling it conventional because it has been there for a while now, solar and wind energy microgrids. So altogether, renewable energy can be there in grids, but I'm talking about microgrids. If I were to talk about renewable energy in large scale grids, then we definitely have the blues of national grids. We really don't want to have renewable energy in the grid because of problems like balancing and ramping. I'm not going to go into too many details of that, but at present, the Indian large grids can take about 15% of renewable energy entirely, but you require a lot more than that. And that is why putting large scale renewable energy plants is something that may not be a really advisable thing. I'm going against what is happening right now, but I think the resource is decentralized. The grids are extremely inefficient and unstable. So it is very important to have a control on a very, very smaller and controllable size, which is village level. And if you can do that, then these problems can be sorted out. Otherwise, you will end up having grid scale energy storage, a very large investment in batteries. You talk with technologies, talk about technologies such as flywheels for energy storage, pumped hydro, which has been there in India for a while, but most of the places it is not working. Then additional hydropower generation capacity has to be there. Gas-based power generation can be there. You can talk about natural gas as a fuel which is cleaner, but one has to remember that natural gas is still not a cleaner fuel when it comes in comparison with, say, biogas or biodiesel or any biomass-based fuel or just plain solar photovoltaic. Then we need strong grid interactions and so on and so forth.
So it's 15 minutes.
Sorry?
It's 15 minutes. If you could cover
in one. Another 2 minutes. Okay. Just 2 more minutes and I'll finish. So the basically large grids have got problem with transient. They have to remain in equilibrium. So there are issues with that. We need to work on the voltage, phase angles, frequencies. And for all that, we require large scale storages in the grid. Whereas when you go to microgrids, small storages, even application-based storages are also sufficient. So I'm not going to go into details of how you can work around these things in large grids, but according to me, large grids is a long shot. Smaller microgrids and the network of small microgrids is what you should be really talking about. It is distributed generation and distributed supply. According to me, that's the real solution that we are talking about. These give the possibility of using 100% renewable. You can minimize the cost of energy and also minimize the impact on environment. You can use waste and convert that to energy. There is very, very limited, if at all, transportation. and then the losses are reduced. Altogether, you have not just electricity as something that you can provide, but you can provide cooking gas, you can provide fertilizers, drinking water, because all these are byproducts of the renewable energy service that you are going to create for providing electricity. So altogether, it is actually creating livelihood in the rural areas. Actually, it is empowering the rural areas, and in a true sense, you are going to move towards energy security and energy self-reliance. When you are talking about such solutions, it also works very well with the soil health improvement, the control on wastewater, and altogether ecological conservation. So when we do this, we are moving to a farming friendly future. We are nurturing the nature. We are converting waste to wealth. We are going to prosperity, solving problems on our own, and really moving to sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mate, for combining so many technologies in one 15 minutes path, and for sharing the paradigm shifts which are needed to actually achieve them. We will just take, although we have run short of time, we'll just take two questions from the audience to cover a few of the topics discussed here. So I'll ask a common question to Dr. Panandikar and Mr. Kapadia. The question is, how can we economically degrow the fossil fuel industry? Dr. Panandikar or Mr. Kapadia? Hello.
Were you able to hear the question, Rahul?
I was, Mr. Kapadia. Would you like to go?
Can she repeat the question? I couldn't hear the question.
Sure, sir. The question is how to economically degrow the fossil fuel industry. Like, how can it be phased out or degrow?
Go ahead, Rahul.
So just a couple of points. I don't think I have the full answer on this one, but I think there's already a lot of viable technologies. I think Dr. Mate has just talked about quite a very interesting concept as well. So I think the first and foremost, as I presented, there's a scenario in which we've already got viable technologies for a large part of what we need to do. They are proven technologies and they're economically viable. So in a way, they don't even hurt the fossil fuel industry, if you may. Fossil fuel companies will have to make choices as to how they can be more of a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem. And so viable technologies, sustainable technologies, and economically viable solutions. So I think in a way they address all the questions and concern of economy, ecology, and growth and everything else. So I think there's an element there which covers a large part. I think that would be a very good start. The second, and this is just a personal perspective that I hold, is that I think it's undeniable that climate is a problem and something that needs almost urgent solution. But I think we need to stop short of demonizing the fossil segment and the sector. It is a sector and a segment that has actually had viable technologies and needs to be part of the solution going forward. Whether it's from a financing perspective, whether it is from a pivoting perspective in providing the impetus on technologies, or whether it is from actually implementing the solutions. We need that sector as well. So while we move away through viable technologies, we need to find a way to work with the sectors and the segments that actually will also deploy these solutions. The third, if I may, and it's a slightly high level solution, is that I think the missing block, and Dr. Ray presented it well, we need to find between the engineering solutions and the political solutions, also the financial solutions. Where and when viable technologies are not yet possible, we are going to need to get innovative. How do you finance even bringing in more efficiencies into carbon capture solutions? How do we make sure, as Mr. Kapadia has put out, how do we make sure that tri-generation technologies can be actually rolled out at scale, knowing very well that they are actually viable technologies and existent in the market? So I think we have to look at all three aspects from my perspective. Mr. Kapadia?
Yeah. The main issue I have is that I don't think you need to think in terms of completely do away with fossil fuel. I do agree that coal is the highest polluting and it should be replaced. The next should come in, next should be phased out would probably be petroleum products, and natural gas can remain because natural gas, I think the excellent point made by Dr. Mate is that you really go to microgrid, and for India, it's an ideal solution. And natural gas can be a backup solution in the sense that anytime you need a backup solution, natural gas would be available. So natural gas is something that we need to really at least be there. In fact, in our opinion, we think it should be around 20% of the total, because by the time you do the flexible or the flexi grid by natural gas with the flexible approach, in the sense that you back up with or you augment with the renewable energy, then it is a very good solution. Then you're down to almost the same level or little more level of carbon dioxide emission than as compared to fossil fuel. So I think natural gas should remain as the backup energy. But I do agree with Rahul that maybe there is a solution. But I think that coal and renewable would and the petroleum products would probably have to find a way out by 2050.
Let me just come in here, Aditi.
Yes, sir.
I would like to remind the address by Niti Aayog chairman, who told us that renewable with battery backup is still cheaper than the fossil fuel, number one. Number two, he said that the hydrogen energy that sphere is yet to be tapped, and that has got very high potential. But what came out of this session is what Rahul Panandikar pointed out, that we may end up becoming the largest emitter by 2050. So if we put it all this together, obviously the challenge is monumental, and every small bit that one can take a step forward will make a difference. Technology will play a major role, which we are going to discuss in the next session. But given that we are overshot the time, I butted in to thank everybody, all the speakers. Dr. Saon, your presentation of the financial aspect was very wonderful. And friends, just to say thank you for such a wonderful session. Over to you, Aditi.
Thank you, sir. Like you said, because we have overshot time, we'll stop the questions here, but we will contact the speakers and we will revert with the answers to the audience. We will now take a 5-minute small break and join again at 5:15. I request you all to stay logged in into the session, but we'll just take a small break until the next session so that everyone can just refresh and come back to their machines. We'll meet again at 5:15.
Thanks, Aditi. Thanks, Professor Malik.
Thank you.
Thank you.